Good morning, Kentucky, South Central Kentucky to be precise, but anybody who's viewing this today, good morning. And we're so excited that you would be with us on this morning. It's a little drizzly here in Tennessee, but we're excited to be a part of this virtual fundraiser. And we want to thank Mike and Tara so much for putting this together on the last minute and making this happen to help save a child. David has got a presentation that he's worked on. You know, we have a theme every year. And so this first part of our talk with you, our little chat, our little fireside chat, is going to be about that theme. And then later on, I'm going to come in and tell you how that theme is manifested in so many Christians doing what needs to be done and shining their light.
So as Dana said, every year as we travel around the country, we have a theme that we like to use for our presentation. And this year's theme is taken from 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 15, where the writer says, "For this is the will of God, that by doing good you might put to silence the ignorance of foolish men." You can see from the map on the screen right now that last year we had some 30 events around the country. And every one of those yellow dots represents a place where we went to war with Satan. When I looked at this, I was reminded of the song that we sometimes sing called "Encamped Along the Hills of Light, Ye Christian Soldiers Rise." And these dots represent places where we came together as individuals and as God's people to do battle with Satan to rescue children from very dark places. And we were victorious. When it comes to the will of God for these little children, we don't have any doubt about what that will is. In Matthew chapter 18 and verse 14, Jesus says to the audience, "For it is not the will of your Father that one of these little ones should be lost." We talk a lot about restoring first century Christianity. And that means more than restoring the ways that we worship in public assemblies. It also involves restoring the way of life that the first century Christians lived, the characteristics that defined their faith. And in the first through the third centuries, the Christians became so identified with the acts of saving thousands of abandoned children at great personal and financial cost. And that characteristic was so unusual at that time that the Romans began to refer to this sect of the Jews, what they called the Galileans, as the third race. And of course, it brings us back to one of the cornerstones of the work that we do from James 1:27, where James defines what pure religion means: to visit the fatherless and the widows in their affliction. And this was a defining attribute of the first century Christians. As a matter of fact, one of the last pagan Roman emperor who was known as Julian the Apostate, he hated these Galileans. As a matter of fact, he's quoted as saying, "These impious Galileans, or Christians, not only feed their own, but ours also. Welcoming them with their agape, they attract them as children are attracted with cakes. And while the pagan priests neglect the poor, the hated Galileans devote themselves to works of charity, and by a display of false compassion, they establish and give effect to their pernicious anemia and their pernicious errors." Julian died in AD 363, and it's recorded that his last words in Latin was "Viciti Galilei," which means the Galileans have conquered. The first century Christians did not change the world simply by having a better religion than the Jews or a better philosophy than the Greeks. They changed the world by the way they lived. They had a better way of life for everyone. We talked a lot today about shining our light, and that men may see our good works and glorify our Father in heaven. This is the type of influence that changes the world. What's interesting in the situation that our country, as a matter of fact, the world is in now, is the etymology of the word influence. It comes from the same word that we use for influenza, something that spreads. And the influence and the spreading effect of the good news, not only of our faith, but our way of life, is like the spreading of a disease. Only in this case, this is an influence that glorifies our Father in heaven. One of the things that we've come to see is what we all do individually becomes who we are known for collectively. In just a few minutes, Dana is going to tell you some amazing stories about how the good work that you all are doing over the last 13 years now and the influence that it is having in the adoption world. Thanks for listening, thanks for giving, and thanks for supporting the work of caring for the fatherless. Goodbye.
Thank you. See you in a few minutes.